In the streets of Chicago, fear had a name. You know, as students of American history, we're totally used to studying the grand mechanics of power, right? The drafting of the Constitution, the passing of landmark legislation, the careful maneuvering of diplomats. But history isn't always forged in the brightly lit halls of government. Sometimes it's carved out of the shadows. Today, we're opening a dark, investigative case study into a period where fear itself became a tangible, paralyzing force in one of America's greatest cities. We are looking at a time when the very fabric of Chicago society was held hostage, not by a foreign army, mind you, but by a domestic shadow state. Okay, let's dive into this. Scarface, the rise and ruin of Al Capone. Think of this explainer as a historical postmortem. We're going to analyze the architecture of a criminal empire's collapse, looking closely at the life and the ultimate ruin of this incredibly infamous figure. This is an investigation into how absolute power can be constructed entirely outside the bounds of the law, and how, inevitably, it decays from the inside out. We're going to treat this not as some glitzy Hollywood myth, but as a rigid historical reality that fundamentally altered the trajectory of law enforcement, civic trust, and society in the United States. Just consider the sheer historical anomaly this represents. I mean, think about the traditional, recognized pillars of absolute authority. Presidents, kings, figures who draw their power from democratic elections, divine right, or established bloodlines. But here, a gangster? This man completely bypassed every traditional mechanism of authority. He didn't run for office. He definitely didn't inherit a throne. Instead, he forged alliances with corrupt officials like Mayor Big Bill Thompson, seizing a level of control that literally rivaled heads of state. It completely disrupted our understanding of how power is supposed to work in a modern American metropolis. Now, I want you to linger on this jarring number for a moment. 30. Since we're all studying the grand arcs of American history here, just let that biological reality sink in. By the age of 30, specifically in 1929, the year he orchestrated the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre, this man was a reigning civic dictator. 30 years old. It's terrifying when you consider the unprecedented youth of this figure. The sheer velocity of his ascent meant that traditional checks and balances, both societal and legal, were entirely unprepared for the speed and ruthlessness of his ambition. We're talking about an empire worth millions of dollars. And actually, let me emphasize this. We're talking about 1920s dollars. The financial weight here is just staggering. This wasn't some disorganized street gang. This was a rapidly expanding multinational corporation of crime, pulling in an estimated $100 million annually at its peak. Built on bootlegging, speakeasies, and brutal protection rackets, the scale of this operation meant it basically functioned with the logistical efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. It pumped immense, untraceable wealth directly into his hands, allowing him to literally buy the infrastructure of the city. And this brilliantly illustrates the complete systemic failure of American civic institutions at the time. A quick look at the different social strata shows that the paralysis was absolute, top-down, bottom-up. Politicians, the very people elected to govern, actively feared him or were outright bought by him. The police, the ultimate enforcers of the state's monopoly on violence, well, they simply couldn't stop him. And most chillingly, ordinary people, the absolute bedrock of civil society, were reduced to whispering his name only when the doors were closed. This right here is what a hijacked society looks like. It's the anatomy of total institutional surrender. His name was Al Capone. After systematically outlining the massive shadow he cast, we have to formally unmask the subject of our historical investigation. This is the man who sat at the absolute center of this web of corruption and fear. But you know, as investigative historians, our job isn't merely to list his conquests. Our job is to understand the fatal contradictions within his reign. We need to look past the mythology and examine the human rot that eventually brought the entire structure to its knees. So the crucial point is the supreme irony of his narrative. On one hand, you have this omnipotent public facade, carefully curated for the press and the public. The expensive suits, the custom luxury cars, the aura of invincibility and endless power. But behind closed doors, this was a man slowly destroying himself. He was insulated from bullets and local police, sure, but he was literally rotting from within due to untreated late-stage neurosyphilis, which systematically destroyed his cognitive functions. It forces us to realize that the most dangerous threat to his empire wasn't the FBI or rival gangs, it was his own deteriorating mind and body. And that leads us to the rigid, tragic, historical inevitability of his enterprise. First, he rose to the absolute top of the criminal world. And then, everything came crashing down. We must frame his trajectory not as a glorification of a criminal mastermind, but as a stark historical lesson. Empires built purely on violence and corruption, they possess absolutely no structural foundations. The ultimate irony of his ruin is that this mastermind of violence wasn't taken down in a blaze of glory. He was undone by forensic accounting. He was convicted for federal tax evasion by IRS accountants. When the center cannot hold, the collapse is total, rapid, and entirely self-inflicted. As we wrap up our explainer today, I really want to leave you with a question, one that you should carry with you into your continued study of American history. If the most feared empire in American history was destroyed from within, was the true threat Capone's power or his own fatal flaws? When we analyze the mechanics of a downfall, we often look for the conquering hero. But in the case of Al Capone, the conqueror and the conqueror were the exact same person. Think about what that tells us about the nature of absolute, unchecked power. Thank you so much for joining me in this investigation. Keep asking the hard questions. Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we are diving straight into the chilling, incredibly dark reality of the most complex and feared drug empire in human history. We're talking about a syndicate of such staggering proportions that it literally brought a sovereign nation to its knees. Now, I know the story feels exactly like a Hollywood thriller, but every single terrifying detail we're about to cover is completely true. Just imagine it for a second. Having a level of power so absolute, so incredibly complete, that an entire country literally holds its breath waiting for your next move. We're talking about wealth that completely defies logic. Currency flowing in at a rate so relentless, you literally cannot spend it. We're talking mountains of physical cash forced to be buried underground because there's simply nowhere else to put it all. I mean, think about the logistics of having that much cash buried in the dirt. It defies comprehension. The cartel had so much money hidden away that every single year, millions of dollars were just written off, gone. And the reason? Rats were eating the bills. Let that sink in. That was the sheer, unquantifiable scale of the empire we're dealing with here. So what do you even do with more money than you can count? Well, you buy power. You arm private militias with military-grade weaponry. You control politicians. You make sure that judges live in a state of paralyzing fear. He became this incredibly dangerous anomaly. On one hand, he was deeply loved by the poor, who actually saw him as a benefactor. But on the other hand, he was relentlessly hunted by a government that was just desperate to stop him. But you know, monsters aren't just born out of nowhere. They're made. And to understand this one, we have to uncover how he was built. Long before becoming the most wanted criminal on earth, Pablo Escobar was just a boy on the dusty streets of Colombia. He grew up surrounded by this suffocating, crushing poverty. He spent his childhood watching families struggle just to survive another day, completely trapped in a cycle of exhausting work with absolutely no way out. And out of that crushing, desperate environment came an unbreakable vow. He would never be poor. Never. It didn't matter what it cost. It didn't matter who got hurt. And it certainly didn't matter how much blood had to be spilled. It's actually a really profound reminder that while some dreams create heroes, dreams that are fueled by absolute rock-bottom desperation can create true monsters. Now, his actual entry into crime, it was practically invisible. We're talking counterfeit lottery tickets, stolen cars, basic street hustles. Really, nothing that makes headlines. But here's the thing. While other criminals were totally content selling grams on street corners, he possessed an emperor's vision. He wasn't dreaming in grams, he was dreaming in tons. But he needed a catalyst, right? And that catalyst came in the form of a massive shift in American culture. In the 1970s, the demand for cocaine just completely exploded. Rich celebrities, Wall Street bankers, Hollywood elites, the market was absolutely insatiable. So by the late 70s, he's out there constructing these covert flight routes and hidden networks, literally plane after plane crossing borders in the dead of night. By the 1980s, the thousands turned into millions, and he cemented himself as one of the richest men on Earth. But a terrifying psychological shift happens when you reach that kind of pinnacle. Money, it stops being the goal. Power becomes the addiction. And his whole philosophy boiled down to one simple, absolutely brutal ultimatum. Plata o plumo. Silver or lead. Take the money or take a bullet. Basically, when he wanted something, he offered you a choice that, well, wasn't really a choice at all. And he used this impossible, terrifying choice to literally buy the fabric of the nation.
He bought the police officers who were meant to arrest him. He bought the politicians meant to legislate against him. He bought the judges meant to sentence him. Through the relentless, heavy-handed leverage of silver or lead, Colombia was slowly suffocating under his personal rule.
But here's the thing about building an empire on violence. You're basically destabilizing the ground right beneath your own feet. Every king creates enemies. And by the early 1990s, the massive empire he had spent years ruthlessly building was starting to show some really deep structural cracks. That aura of total invincibility, it was fading. And the shadows of his enemies were growing much, much longer. Suddenly, the enemies were everywhere. They were closing in from all sides. You had a Colombian government desperate to end the daily violence. You had the United States heavily demanding his extradition. You had rival cartels who were just hungry for bloody revenge. And, of course, thousands of grieving families demanding justice. The walls were rapidly closing in on the emperor.
And man, the descent was rapid. It was brutal. The untouchable king was violently forced into the shadows, becoming nothing more than a hunted fugitive. The sprawling world of a billionaire suddenly shrank to the size of cramped safe houses and hidden rooms. He couldn't even walk freely outside anymore. His allies vanished, his power evaporated. He was completely, totally cornered.
This all reaches a completely claustrophobic climax on December 2nd, 1993. After months of an intense, completely exhausting manhunt, authorities finally tracked the ghost down. They found him cornered in a small, unassuming neighborhood in Medellin. Think about that. The man who had built literal armies was now trapped in an ordinary house, desperately trying to find a way out, as consequence finally, inevitably, arrived at his door. He scrambled, trying to escape across the rooftops. Gunfire echoed through the city streets, and then, within moments, the ghost was gone. As our sources describe it perfectly, no palace, no army, no billions, no empire, only silence. The man who once made presidents tremble lay lifeless, and his entire foundation of terror just immediately dissolved into dust. When you step back, the true tragedy here lies in this really bitter irony. In his bloody, relentless quest to escape poverty, he gained, unimaginably. He got the global fame, the massive wealth, the absolute power. Yet, in the process of accumulating it all, he sacrificed the only thing that actually mattered: peace. He lived his final days in a state of total gripping paranoia and fear. So it leaves us all with a pretty haunting question. Can any empire built on fear ever truly last? It's a dark, lingering warning that unchecked ambition can transform a dreamer into a complete monster. And honestly, no matter how much currency you bury in the earth, eventually, every empire falls. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.